Alright, this is your first DIY video for 8.8b. We're almost finished with everything we need to learn for this project, so you can start hopefully making your own videos and we can submit them. But we're going to look at writing a real-world problem when given an equation. So here's an equation that we can look at and try to determine what scenario would make sense to use this equation for. So remember that we are talking about equations because it has an equal sign and that it means this side and this side, the left side and the right side, are actually equal to each other. Alright, so we can determine an unknown quantity that a variable could represent. We could write verbal expression for each side of the equation. So a situation that we could say that this means is first asking yourself, what could X represent? Because that's what we're solving for. That is our unknown. So at the end of the day, we would ask ourselves, how many of something? Because that's what X represents, is a value that is unknown. So we want to know how many of something. So let's use how many students are enrolled at Navasota. X can represent the number of students enrolled in Navasota. At NJH, and that's what we're going to be looking for. How many students are enrolled at NJH? So we can give two situations to find the total number of students, and it can go something like this. 30 more, here's my 30 more, than half of the students in Navasota belong to a social network. Then we could say 5 less here than 3/5 of the students have an email account. If the number of students who belong to a social network is equal to the number of students with an email account, how many students are enrolled at Navasota? I just made that one up. I mean, you could have your own situations that you make up, and you will be given choices to match the situation. So every time you always need to make sure the first question you ask yourself is, what might the variable represent? And it's usually the number of something. And then you have to look at what you're doing. Adding 30 to half of that number, subtracting 5 from 3/5 of that number, and if you were to actually solve this equation, you would find out what the total number is. So let's look at another equation here and try to come up with a scenario that would make this a true statement. So once again, the first thing that you need to think about whenever you're trying to match scenarios or real-world problems with equations is, what does the variable represent? So I'm just going to make something up and say that the variable represents how many cards you have in a set. Okay? So how many cards you have in a set. That's what my variable could possibly represent, and I can come up with a scenario saying that Luis has 5 more cards, represented by this, than half of the cards in the collector set, and Donnie has 10 fewer cards than 3/4 of what's in the collector set. How many total cards are in the set? So if we were to solve this equation for n, we would see the number of cards that were in total because we're comparing Luis and Donnie's amount of cards. And that's really pretty much it with matching these scenarios to equations. Like I said, you will be given a list, multiple choice, of which scenario matches the set, and if you always ask yourself what is the equation, and making sure that what your variable is, and making sure that when you solve the variable that your scenario makes sense, you should get all of these right. So there's some practice evidence for you to do to try this out. The next video is going to talk about matching inequalities to scenarios. So take a look at that DIY, and then before you do the evidence, and then give it a try, and you should be good to go on this standard. Thanks a lot. This is 8.8B DIY video number 1 complete.